This podcast series is created with the purpose of gathering real life testimonies of persons who are now implementing sustainable practices in their personal and professional lives. With this, generate practical and inspiring implementation of practices that promote sustainability. This podcast is hosted, presented, and edited by me, Yusef Abdo. This project will contribute to getting my master's degree in Environment and Management at Royal Rose University. I acknowledge that this research has been hosted from the Likiwin-speaking people, the Sungis and Esquimalt Nation traditional land. Today is joining me Bob Peart. Bob is a biologist, environmental leader, educator, and volunteer who has spent decades working for nature in Canada, recognized for demonstrating significant contributions to the conservation of Canada's biodiversity, landscapes, and wilderness. Bob has consistently supported the establishment and maintenance of national parks and the protected areas, the protection of indigenous rights concerning environmental stewardship, and the facilitation of access for all Canadians to the natural world. Currently, Bob is part of the Saanich Peninsula Environmental Coalition, which focuses on developing a bioregional framework. This framework outlines a set of common principles to facilitate ecological sustainable practices on the Saanich Peninsula, which is composed of three municipalities: Central Saanich, North Saanich, and Sydney. These located on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. Bob, thank you so much for being here. To start our interview, I'm going to quote the World Commission on Environment and Development, and I'm going to define sustainability according to them. And I quote: sustainability is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. But my question is this: from your perspective, Bob, what does sustainability means to you in your work and your life?
Well, it's interesting because that quote comes from this book, Our Common Future. And when this book came out, it was a bit of a Bible. It would have come out in 1987. And at the time, I was very fortunate. I actually heard her speak in Vancouver at a conference, and it was pretty heady stuff for someone to come out and to try to define sustainability. And that whole idea of trying to develop without harming nature, the whole balance thing. I think my perspective on that, 13, nearly 30, 40 years later, is balance doesn't work. And I think it was really wonderful for Ho Brundtland to make that step and for the IUCN to make that step. But I think the experience has been, and the history has been, you try to find balance and nature loses every time. And so I think you can see, certainly from the people I work with and the colleagues I've been involved with over the last few decades, the perspective on sustainability has changed a lot. And certainly the perspective on sustainability now has been able to get away from the whole idea of balance and try to ensure that ecological integrity is at the forefront. If we haven't got environmental health, we can't have an economy. We haven't got environmental health, we can't have a functioning society. And so you've got kind of a core at the bottom of which other things branch from. But if nature isn't solid, if nature isn't sustainable, we're not going to be able to stay with a rich and fulfilling life here on Earth. And I think you can see now that that isn't happening. And we can probably get into that in later parts of the interview. But we're clearly out of sync, and clearly ecological health hasn't been stressed. And because of that, uh, aspects of the economy and aspects of the social world have overrun the importance of kind of keeping the environment intact, and it's led to the situation that we're in right now. So as much as I honor and as much as I really respect the work that was done in 1987, it was really leading edge work. I think we can see a few decades later that the paradigm of balance isn't effective.
Okay. And now that you mentioned that there is some changes about the understanding of sustainability during the time, what do you consider provokes this change among the time in relation to the concept of the understanding of what sustainability is?
From my perspective, I think that the the change in what we had to perceive sustainability as being came from you could just see on the land. Like during my lifetime, we've got a third fewer birds than we had,
Okay.
in the late 60s, early 70s. Clearly, the environment is changing. There are thousands of animals and creatures that are endangered. The web of life is threatened. And so, from my experience, we had to start to work with a different philosophy and a different concept of what sustainability was, because the balanced paradigm that Paul Brundtland talked about wasn't effective. I think for people who are in the business world, they really like that approach, because they can use that approach to their advantage, and they can say, "Listen, yes, sure, we're really taking care of nature as we develop, a mine or whatever," and they can, replant some fields, and they can, maybe put scrubbers in their mine. But in the long run, if you do any kind of cradle to grave analysis, that clearly isn't um, clearly doesn't work for the long run. So, myself, I try to avoid using the word sustainability, because it's just such a confusing word. I was on a organization called the Fraser Basin Council for 10 or 15 years, and I remember, and its whole thesis is sustainability of the Fraser Basin. And one time, just for fun, um, there were 20 some odd people sitting in the room. We took 10 minutes and we sat down and wrote out what we thought sustainability was and handed it in. And there were 20 different views. And so I'm sure this is what you're finding about it in all your research as well. And so I think that sustainability has got so much pliability. Um, it can mean whatever you want it to mean for whatever the circumstances are. And with that kind of flexibility, nature loses. And so I think we really have to have ecological health and ecological integrity in the forefront.
Thank you so much. If you'll allow me, I'm going to highlight the word. When you mentioned sustainability, you mentioned conservation. That might be like a kind of guide of understanding your own
Yeah.
perspective, right?
Again, when you talk about
Mhm.
conservation, you can look at it from a biodiversity point of view, and I think that's really useful, because to protect biodiversity, you have to protect biodiversity at the gene level, species level, population level. It's a much stronger, richer way of kind of looking towards the future, because you've got
Mhm.
some things you can actually measure, and you can there are metrics there, and you've got a baseline, and you can see whether you're moving towards success or not.
Yeah. And now that you're mentioning measurements, how do you measure if your efforts are bringing real life impact? How do you measure your success in a way to call it?
Yeah, I know from the two or three things I've been really active in my life. I've been very active in parks and wilderness. And so, if you get out a map of British Columbia, there are lots of parks, lots of green spaces, and so number of those green spaces in British Columbia are a result of work that myself and others have done. And so, I think having those legislated protected areas on the ground or in the marine areas is a real sense of measurement. And then over a long period of time, people have been saying for a couple decades, nature needs half. and so you can continue to build towards that measurement of nature needing half. You've got a baseline that you're moving towards. That's a metric that's measurable. It's a metric that you can see, and so I think that's really important too. Another really important metric is uh, that relates to work that I've been doing is um, getting people outside. And I think there's a metric there of how many children 15 and under are spending half an hour a day or more outside just playing. And those metrics are available. There's an organization in Ottawa that does that year after year after year. And and so um, so I think having those ecosystems in those areas set aside and legislated is really fundamental to the future. And moving towards nature needing half is really important. And I think the other side of it is, particularly because we live in urban environments, children and families have to get outside. And again, I could go on for hours. We'd still be talking by Sunday, but but there's just so much written about the value and importance of children getting outside for at least half an hour a day just to play and getting off the screens. So green time instead of screen time. And there's been again a whole analysis done of when I was a kid, when I was a child, people left the house and they went maybe a mile or two from their house and they were gone for most of the day, long as you were home for supper, sort of thing. And now the statistics show that children maybe will leave their yard if they have a yard, and they might go outside for 5-10 minutes a day. And so there's been a fundamental shift in the amount of time children and families are spending outside, just enjoying themselves. People are recreating, they're playing soccer and they're doing all those different things, but that isn't just being outside. And so that differentiation is really important. So back to your question, yes, I think there are metrics, and there are ways of measuring whether we're improving both in environmental health and human health, and bringing the that conversation together. Environmental health, human health is a fundamental conversation to have. We don't use the word health enough in our conversations.
It's interesting because it's important to measure the work is being done. And sometimes also this will lead to motivate people, right? To keep working toward these goals. And this lead me to the next question. What inspired you to adopt these practices to promote this conservation that you are talking to us?
Yeah, there are two or three things there. It's a very interesting question, and actually, it's a question I talk to my colleagues about quite a bit. Like, so why are you doing this stuff? What went on in your life? But anyway, I was very fortunate. I've been outside all my life, and playing and just enjoying nature. So part of the reason that I do what I do, it's just who I am. I've done it ever since I was a kid, and so it isn't kind of a new practice for me. But then I think the motivations that keep me going are that I'm very fortunate. I've had some successes. I've done some very interesting things in my life. I've met some wonderful people, and so that's kept me going. I think that you can see that the fabrication and the essence of nature is really in trouble. So nature needs our help, and I continue to kind of step forward and try to speak for nature because nature hasn't got her own voice, and so that's a motivation. I think the other thing is the community work, and I think that people who live in community, and my particular community, I guess, would be the Sandwich Peninsula, and but I think people who live in the community can help and can support each other. And I've worked internationally, nationally, provincially, and sometimes it's very, very frustrating to try to get success over at that scale often takes like time, years. I'm involved in a conversation to get a national park in the South Okanagan, and we're into our 22nd year of what was supposed to be a 3-year conversation. So it takes time, and that's very frustrating. But working at the community level, you can meet interesting people. You can talk about what can be done in the community, and you can support the community people, and you can really have quite a demonstrative effect at the community level, and that can be really rewarding as well. And so I think it's that kind of level of stuff. But I'm really fortunate. I found my passion, if that's the word, when I was young, and I've been able to figure out how to stay with that passion throughout my lifetime.
And thank you so much for sharing. And in your opinion, Bob, what are the biggest sustainability challenges faced by organizations or by individuals today? And what do you think people don't integrate these conservation activities into their daily practices or in their organizations? What could be the main reasons they see this as a challenge?
Yeah. Well, two or three things. One is I think that, as we said earlier, people don't people don't connect their health to the health of the environment, and so that connection isn't made, and they don't realize that as they as development takes place in wherever, that over a long period of time, the cumulative effect of that is it's hard on human health. So that connection between human health and ecological health is fundamental, and people don't have that. People are moving into the urban environment. Again, there's lots of metrics there, Yusuf. You can see about how there are fewer people on the land, more people in the cities. The cities are getting bigger, and so I think people are being removed from nature, and so I think that's a real challenge. And I think the other thing is that someone said to me one time, oh, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago, that the environment is the top back of the mind issue. It's really important to think about. It's the top back of the mind issue. So people kind of have got a bit of a sense that it's important, but yet they have to feed their kids and they don't want to be late for school. And, the day to day stuff takes over. And occasionally that top back of the mind issue jumps forward. But there was something the other day, there was some kind of survey here in British Columbia about, because there's an election in October, and people were surveyed as well, what's on your mind about the upcoming election? I think environment was 9. Like, holy crow. So I think people are just removed from the environment. But I think overall, what's driving that is capitalism and consumerism. And I think and so then that leads to the challenges that we're facing in today's world is climate. I mean, people have got to get their heads around the fact that climate has changed, and that's going to be so dramatic. And if you see a lot of change now, you wait 15 years. Like it's really what's coming is really going to be severe and very disruptive. And so climate is really important. And I think that social media has really affected the ability to have dialogue, the ability to have conversations. And so that's having a really upsetting effect on democracy. And so I think that's very bothersome. And so you've kind of got technology, climate, um, democracy, and health. Those things are all intertwined. And those are certainly the challenges that are facing us and facing society today. And I think the other thing I'll say is that a lot of what needs to be done can't be done on a volunteer basis. We've seen decade after decade after decade where companies will say, well, I'll volunteer to do this, and I'll reduce my emissions, all this sort of. So it's got to be legislated. There's some things that need to be done and they need to be said. It isn't popular from a democracy point of view. It won't get you reelected, but I think there's some practical legislative measures that need to take place. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to get out of the situation that we're in.
It's interesting because I can see the link with the challenges and the solutions of these challenges into the measurement you mentioned. Because actually, in the measurement, you mentioned the time outside and the legislation.
Yeah.
And now, actually, because my next question was going to be the solutions of those challenges. And you are just answered that question. More legislation and more time outside, right?
Yeah, I think that people need to get outside.
Yep.
We need to get off carbon.
Okay.
Um, we need to encourage dialogue. People need to vote. One of the things that's really discouraging, again, from my perspective, when I first started to vote, there was like a 75% turnout. And now it's, what is it? Is it 55 to 60, somewhere in through there? Well, I actually believe that, like, I think it's in Australia. I'm not sure. I could be wrong there, but you have to vote. It's the law. And I actually think the law should be, you vote. And if you don't, you get fined. And so then I think that if people knew they were um, going to have to vote, perhaps some of them would be a bit more thoughtful about where they're going to put their tick in the box. Whereas now, that doesn't really matter. I'm not going to vote anyway. But
Yeah.
yet, who you have in office and who you have in your legislature, whether it's at the community level or the international level, really affects, you know, the changes that need to be made.
And in this way, you're making the people part of this, right? I mean,
Right.
if you're voting, is you're showing your interest or you're being part of this. The person who is making legislation is because you decide, or
Mhm.
you are part of the people who's deciding who's there making the law, right?
That's right. That's right. And then back to the concept about sustainability. My hope would be that as people went in to make their mark in the little box as to who they're going to vote for, the people they'd be voting for would be people who are thoughtful about the environment and people who are thoughtful about nature and concerned about the future, and not people who are developers and capitalists. And not to say they're bad people at all. I'm not saying that, but I think that the 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 type of work that they do is very, very harmful to the environment unless you're thoughtful about it.
Okay. And now that we're talking about the environment and the impact we have in our participation, how do you integrate these actions in the coalition in your organization? How did you integrate, or how the coalition is part of these activities?
Yeah. So really, really quickly, so we live on the peninsula, and there are three municipalities, and if we're going to have a really good future for the municipality, I mean for the Saanich Peninsula, the three municipalities need to work together. So collaboration was very, very important. And so when we put the Saanich Peninsula Environmental Coalition together, collaboration was top of the mind. We wanted to have we developed this bioregional framework, and we wanted to have the principles of the bioregional framework embedded in the work that each of the three municipalities do. And so that collaborative approach was really, really important. And that collaboration was thinking about like nature-based solutions, the management of natural assets, um, and engaging in those kinds of processes that were more peninsula wide rather than just municipality by municipality. And the undercurrent behind that was ecological health, ecological integrity, and involving people and citizens in the decision making process so it's transparent. So that's really what the SPEC, the Sandwich Peninsula Environmental Coalition, was about. And we've been quite successful. We're actually pretty proud of what we've done because the official community plans of Sydney and Central Saanich, a lot of what we've been talking about are embedded in those official community plans. And the North Saanich plan is just being developed. And there was a presentation at their council 10 days ago, and it could have been taken out of our work plan. It was really pretty amazing. And so I think things are heading in the right direction. But now what we need to do, and again, we've been talking about this, is what are the metrics? So we can sit here and pull on our suspenders and say, wow, we've done a great job. But so what? So we need to now our goal is to set a mechanism in place so that 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, we can actually measure the outcomes, measure the success. And so what we're trying to do is to think now as to what are those outcomes that are measurable. So forest canopy, um, watershed restoration, increasing the amount of eelgrass that there is along the seashore. Those kinds of things are measurable. And so what we're doing now is trying to figure out what those measurements are going to be and then develop a public participation process to engage the community in that. And then we can go back to the three councils and say, well, you're doing very, very well on X, but you're doing terrible on Y. And so we can start to measure and set out a progress report process. So that's kind of what we're moving. That's what we're moving to now, all in the sense of back to this conversation, all in the sense of making sure that there's a sense of sustainability on the Saanich Peninsula, and that sustainability is based on ecological health.
Okay, okay. And in your experience, do you think any of these actions can be transferred to other fields?
Yeah, it's very scalable, and the Saanich Peninsula borders on Saanich. So I'm having conversations with the folks in Saanich about how do we connect what's happening in Saanich with what's happening on the Saanich Peninsula. I had a meeting 10 days ago that was capital region wide about, nature-based solutions, natural assets. So the whole thing is quite scalable. And again, I don't think I realized what I was doing at the time when we were setting up the SPEC, the Sandwich Peninsula Environmental Coalition. But those fundamentals are fundamentals whether you're working at the community level, the provincial level, the national level. It's kind of what I've been doing all my life. But I don't think I realized that I was transferring, that perspective from a larger scale into a smaller scale at the community level. So yes, it's very scalable, and I think there's lots of interest in how can this be applied in more of a broad kind of way. And I think the fundamentals are pretty basic, and then as you move the principles from place to place to place, what the outcomes might look like and what the specific approaches might be may vary, but it's still based on those three or four basic principles. Yeah.
And now, talking about the work you're doing and the coalitions and your leadership, environmental actions, imagine there is a person willing to have this success or this impact in their community, and they're looking to develop or implement their own bioregional frameworks for sustainability. What advice would you give to these persons or to these groups to have a better impact or a greater impact in their actions as sustainability actions in the community?
Yeah, I think that encourage dialogue, encourage conversations, try to get away from the polarization. Find your champions, work with your champions, start small, grow out, be patient, work with respect, work with trust. And I think it's really important to develop relationships with the government or the organization that you're working with, both at the staff level and then the elected level. And I think that, again, depending on where you're working and depending on the situation, the indigenous input is fundamental. So on the Saanich Peninsula, we've been very fortunate to be able to have a strong relationship with the Saanich Nation. And so I think that if I was talking to someone who was thinking of doing something similar, I'd certainly talk about having that conversation with the indigenous people was really, really important. But I think it's working at it kind of slow but steady in a patient kind of way, trust, respect, and again, back to measurement, figuring out what the outcomes were. Do it in baby steps. Like, what's your first, okay, and then what's your next? What's your next? And kind of think about, well, where you might want to be, 3 to 5 years from now, and how can you slowly, work your way towards that, and start with a smaller circle, and slowly over a period of time, it builds out. And I find personally, I find the community work quite rewarding because people are really, really thankful for taking care of where you live.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, to bring together all the participants and to make a bigger impact, right?
Yes.
And just finishing this interview, Bob, thank you so much. Do you have any suggestion or concern about sustainability or conservation practices that we have made missed during this interview?
Well, I think my concern again would be that I think that generally most people in the world are either totally oblivious or very naive about the situation that we're in. This is serious stuff. We're in a mess. And I think it's really, really important to acknowledge that. But I think it's really important to not to have that drive you down and say, well, if we're in such a mess, why bother? I mean, there's always things you can do. I was having a conversation with someone the other day about, yeah, sure, there's some tough stuff going on right now, but there's some really good things happening. You know, uh, they found a new species of animal that they thought was extinct the other day, and I forget where it was. But there's really good things happening, and so I think not to, and so to continue to be excited and encouraged, and try to find a way that you can live that gives the you as an individual some reason to have to be thoughtful. And I always say to people, it's really important to vote, really important to be engaged in society. It's really important to find something you can do to act on your passion and to act on your interest. Even if you volunteer for a nonprofit society and lick envelopes and put stamps on an envelope, whatever it is, you're doing something that's linked to your passion, and find what that something is. Eat locally, plant, have gardens, and so I think that, again, there's some things you can do there that are really, really important. Um, in all your activities, do everything you possibly can to get off carbon. No coal, no gas, um, and moving towards a non-carbon future is really, really fundamental. And use mass transit, bicycle, walk. So those are the kinds of things that I say to people. And if you kind of combine all those together, then you're doing something. And so I think it's really, really important to be able to try to find those things that you can do in today's world that provide you some sense of being for yourself or your family.
Dear Bob, thank you so much for your time and your effort today. I am confident that your message will resonate with the audience and inspire them to implement your valuable insights.
Glad to help, and thank you very much for contacting me.